Hello, welcome to episode 1 of the Astro Witch with me. I'm Ellie and I'm going to be your host. In this podcast, we are going to talk about all things mystical. For a little bit about me, I am an Astro Witch, a glamour witch, certified Hellenistic astrologer, and I love teaching about astrology. So that's what today and future episodes are going to be all about, as well as teaching you about mystical things, the energy, and upcoming transits and how they're going to impact everyone. If you want to join this podcast live, you will have to join my Patreon. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the recorded version. My Patreon will always be linked in the description on YouTube and such. So let's start diving into today's agenda and talking about everything that we're going to talk about today. So like I said, I'm Ellie. I am a mystical advisor, and I've been doing mystical advisor work since 2017. I'm also an astrologer and a witch and a practicing Hellenic pagan, meaning that I work with Greek deities, and I will be talking about that kind of stuff in later episodes. I am a divination witch, so I do things like tarot, and I use astrology as a form of divination. And this is stuff that I teach on TikTok, here on YouTube, and on my Patreon. So this is going to be a very astro-heavy episode. Not every episode will be, but in just about every episode I will be talking about current transits, and that's how I'm going to be opening up today's episode as well. So today we're going to talk about the current transits of this upcoming week, and the traditional meanings of the signs in astrology.
So let's start with the upcoming transits. If you are watching this, the transits are going to be up on the screen, and we're actually starting out with what would be the transits of right now. It's off by just a little while. We're currently in a Leo hour, and I totally did that on purpose. I did a little bit of electional work. So it's interesting because the transits of the beginning of this podcast actually match up almost perfectly with the transits of my birth, including the not so nice Cancer Mars, which we will talk about in a moment. So whenever we have that exalted sun, that is going to be a very powerful time to start new things. And we also have the sun and Jupiter together in Aries. So we're starting this at a Leo hour while we have an exalted sun playing around with Jupiter, and while Mercury is still there. And this is probably a later episode on event astrology, which is a type of astrology that I'm still studying. But it's really interesting and cool to see how what's going on in the stars lines up with the energies of the things that we create. And in fact, that's kind of where the concept of natal astrology, or the astrology of the moment you're born, comes from. It's not from, oh, the stars are causing this to happen necessarily, although some people do believe in causational astrology, but instead natal astrology is like the stars and where they were aligned in the exact moment that you were born can tell a story of your life. But now we're talking about transits, which is more about event and current happenings. So this is not just going to be for now, this is going to be for the next week or so. And I plan on talking about this every week here on the podcast. So let's talk about Mars in Cancer, which is traditionally a difficult placement. It is not a great placement. Mars does not love being in Cancer. And it doesn't mean we can't make the best of this, but especially for those of you who are born in the daytime, that would make Mars the greater malefic. So Mars is the mean guy in your chart. It's interesting because when it comes to the malefics, they are necessary. It's like the villain in a movie. They're the bad guy in your life, but they're helping you get to a point. They're helping you grow. They're helping you overcome. When it comes to Mars, it tends to be like the hardship and the things that you fight through. When we have Mars in Cancer, Mars does not like being in Cancer because Mars is trying to fight, and Cancer is saying, slow down, let's nurture ourselves, let's nurture others. Mars destroys life, and Cancer is the mother and creates life. So there's just a little bit of a miscommunication and misunderstanding there. So in traditional astrological terms, Mars is said to be depressed or fallen in Cancer, meaning that it's disrespected, it's pushed down, it just doesn't have the energy, it's lacking something. And that's what's happening in the stars right now. The area of life that Mars in Cancer is falling in for you can show where some energy, and especially some nurturing, is being repressed. And I think this is still a great time to start new things because the sun is exalted and the sun is a life creator too. But do prepare that, like, if you take advantage of this juicy, like, sun and Jupiter energy, that you may feel some pushback. And it may be internally. It may be you pushing back against yourself. And this is such a beautiful reminder of the fact of life, which is that we are all going through many things at once. We're all having many experiences in the same moment and in the same time. So in those moments where we feel like everything's bad, in fact, there's some good. And in those moments where, like right now, we have this juicy sun and Jupiter and vibrancy, it's also like we may feel some pushback. And just because we experience that pushback doesn't mean that great things aren't happening too. We get to have both. I was actually born with Mars in Cancer. It's the most difficult placement in my chart. But a part of my life is around learning to work with that instead of fighting against it, right? If we get on Mars's level and we try to fight, then we just create more fight in a place where fight does not want to be created. So Mars in Cancer right now is creating a lack in whatever area Cancer is in your chart. And Cancer tends to represent nurturing, creation, phases of life. So Mars is creating a lack there. One of the biggest ways that I see this coming up is a lack of nurturing or self-care. So one of the ways that you can combat this energy is fiercely loving yourself and caring for yourself. Like one of the ways that you can almost help balance this or mitigate this. So I do think there's a possibility of miscommunications right now, especially if you have Cancer in like the 11th house, even the 12th house. If you have it in the 7th house, the 3rd house, even the 4th house or 5th, those are houses that can very deeply connect to the way that we relate with others. And of course, if you are a Cancer rising, then this is just going to impact you more than anyone else. So let's break down why that is. The 12th house is actually a house of enemies. So if you have this, if you are Leo rising like me, basically, then you may feel a lot of tension around your negative relationships with others, and especially around secret enemies that you don't even know are enemies yet. There might be some things coming out of the woodwork. Prepare. And I'll be breaking down, I break down specific transits for each rising sign on my Patreon, so check that out. But 11th house is friendships, 7th house is relationships, 5th house is dating, 3rd house is closer friendships. So you can kind of see how if you happen to have Mars and Cancer falling there, then that can show a lot of combative energy around those relationships. And it's not anything to be afraid of, it's just something to be aware of, because the best relationships will be able to overcome a combative time like this. Like if you happen to have Cancer in the 7th house, like if you are a Capricorn rising, that doesn't mean this is going to lead to breakups, but do recognize like you may need to pause and figure out what you really want to say, or you might need to even caution your partner like, hey, there's this transit that's really impacting me, and astrology is one of my belief systems, so it would be great if you could pause and figure out how we can nurture our relationship together instead of getting into silly misunderstandings. So that's one way to work with this energy. And the other thing is this, for some, this transit is actually making you feel extra soft. It's making you feel sensitive, because that's what happens when Mars comes in Cancer. Cancer is a shell, and we can acknowledge that while also acknowledging that there is an emotional sensitivity. And many Cancers will hide their emotions, hide their feelings, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And so when Mars comes into Cancer, this is actually one of the placements that I see as being the traditional like stereotype of a sensitive person, because Mars is rough and hard and mean, and Cancer is just trying to fucking chill and go with the flow. So when that happens, there can be an extra softness and extra sensitivity, almost like flinching, like ugh. So it's really important to take care of yourself and any particular triggers that you have. Like if you have wounds, especially if you're a day chart person, if you're someone who's been through trauma, been through healing, this can really, really trigger all of that. So awareness helps. And now here's the weird thing. We're in Aries season and we have this exalted sun. So the good thing about this is the exalted sun is partially a ruler of Aries. And so while Mars is not going to be able to properly take care of Aries in this time, I think the sun will do a good job stepping up. It's like when the big boss leaves and the assistant manager is in charge. It might do a pretty good job. And in some traditions, the exalted positions are even considered higher than domicile. Not in my traditions, but in some. So worth noting. And so it's an Aries season. The sun is holding up Aries right now, but Mars is not going to be able to. It's really like a substitute principal or substitute teacher stepping in. And it can do a great job. Like, I even remember, just for a silly kind of metaphor, when I was a kid, one of my teachers, who I did enjoy, was pregnant and ended up bringing in a substitute teacher who was actually great. And that teacher actually ended up taking over the class because the other teacher decided to retire and stay home with her baby. And I think that's great for her. And that's kind of the situation that we're in right now, where it's like Mars is just not able to take care of the house of Aries. So the sun is doing it. And that's great, because that's going to bring about the sense of like creation, new things. And I think that this is a wonderful season to start new creations, especially if you want to do so during a Leo hour. And the reason for that is, if you're starting things during a Leo hour, that puts the sun in an exalted and rejoicing position in the 9th house. It puts it there with Jupiter. And then it also puts that Venus and Taurus in the 10th house, which is an angular house. So look up those Leo hours. Consider starting new projects, new creations, new businesses, even like planning dates, new relationships, anything like that. If you've been wanting to do something, this is your sign that Aries season, the season of a new beginning, the season of spring is here, is the time to just finally do it. Now, we've had Saturn in Pisces. It's been here a little while. Let me know in the comments how you've been feeling that, how you've been settling into that. I think there are some ups and downs, right? And if you're born in the daytime, you're going to feel transits more constructive. And if you're born in the nighttime, you're going to feel transits more destructive. And so Saturn in Pisces is actually a little less constructive than it was in Aquarius or Capricorn, because Saturn is in domicile in those places. Saturn likes being in those places. It's helpful in those places. And now it's in Pisces. And I think it could be constructive for many, especially if you have a more constructive like Saturn placement in your natal chart. But we also have to recognize it's no longer in its own energy. It's no longer in the zone. And instead, it's going to feel a little uncomfortable. The realistic sign of setting boundaries and, doing hard work, being dedicated, is now in the sign of the optimistic, helpful dreamer, Pisces. So the upside of this is gorgeous, fertile energy to actually put the work in to whatever it is that you want to create. Like, this is a phenomenal time to get shit done. This is a great time to put your dedication and practicality into your dreams and desires. But you have to recognize that it can be a bummer too. Like, Pisces doesn't love this. Pisces, it's like the boss is coming in, and instead of letting it be a dreamy, floaty creator, it's like, get your fucking work done. You have deadlines, and that's not comfortable. So especially for those of you with prominent Pisces energy, recognize this may be an uncomfortable time for you. So that's what we have there. It's creating more realism, but Saturn in Pisces perhaps creates more realism than many of us are comfortable with. It's really making us mature in whatever area of life it's touching. So like, if you have it in the 10th house, if you're you have the 10th house in Pisces, then it's creating realism around your career and around your dreams. If you have it in the 7th house, it's creating realism around your connection with others, relationships, business partners, and the like. And it's not always fun in the moment. But the thing that I find about Saturn transits is they can start out quite difficult and then get easier as time goes. It requires patience, because when a Saturn transit first starts, it's not always going to be comfortable. And it's one of those transits that I think, is it always comfortable? No. Is it always worth it? Yes. Because if you are willing to learn the lessons and do the hard work, you're going to get the cookies. You're going to get your dessert. That's one way that I always describe Saturn, is Jupiter is like the fun parent. It's the parent where it's like, eat that cookie whenever you want to. here's your dessert. Saturn is like the parent that says you need to eat your vegetables, and then I'll give you 2 cookies instead of 1, especially for those of you with a more constructive Saturn placement. And I could do a whole series on what a constructive Saturn placement is and how it actually helps you, and I probably will. But yeah, it's helping us mature in an area of life. It's helping us actually get things done, but it's not always, it's going to feel weird because it may even be an area of life that you've never had to be mature, you've never had to step up, and suddenly you just feel this urge to, especially if you have a natal Saturn in Pisces. This would be your Saturn return, so that means your maturity is like necessary in this time, and it's not always comfortable, but it is necessary. Now, as you can see, we are starting off this week with the moon in Virgo. I think this is a great time to take advantage of like mystical energy to work your magic. My witchy bitches who are watching this is a great time to do some spell work. That's because Virgo was traditionally seen as a sign of mysticism. Virgo was described as initiates into the occult. This is a great time to do some kind of new magical, mystical project. And if you want to know what you could use and work this energy with, definitely look at where this Virgo moon is in your chart. So in this example, if someone were a Cancer rising, it would be in their 3rd house. It's a great time to do spells around communication, spells around if someone has like a new writing project, spells around manifesting travel if you want to get really fun with it. Great time for all of that for you Cancer risings. Now, the Sun and Jupiter are together right now, so this is like a luckier Aries season. I don't know if it's me having many prominent Aries placements, but Aries seasons always feel lucky to me, and I adore Aries energy. Love being an Aries, right? But this Aries season is even more magical. So Aries energy is always the start of spring, which is the beginning of fertility and starting new projects. And it's interesting because we kind of come out of hibernation in spring. Like, we are not bears, obviously, but I do think humans get a little sleepier in the winter. Even myself living in California, like, I don't even have a real winter over here, but I still find myself coming more alive in the spring, and I think that's true for many people, though of course not for everyone. And so Aries season is always this renewed sense of fertility and newness, and a great time to start new things. And with Jupiter here, Jupiter is a planet that many of you are underestimating, because yes, it is the planet of luck and abundance, but it's also a planet of like lovemaking and fertility and relationships and just like all the good, joyous things in the world. So I adore Jupiter, and I think it should have a even better reputation than it does. It's a lovely planet. It is a benefic, and if you're born in the daytime, it's the greater benefic. So Jupiter and the Sun are friends. They are both daytime planets. They are sect mates, and having them together in Aries right now, which is the Sun's exalted sign, is making this an even more joyous, fertile, and lucky time to start new things. So here's the interesting thing though. Because we have that difficult Cancer, because we have the recent Saturn in Pisces, it's like great things are happening, but you do have to work for it. And I think that's why many of you are like, okay, we're in this Aries season, it's supposed to be lucky, but I don't feel it yet. And it's because you do have to work for it. And it may not feel fun in the moment, but the outcome and the aftermath is where a lot of the magic comes from here. It's almost like we're dragging our feet and knowing that we're going to get to the good things, but we're like, when am I actually going to get there? Where is it at? And that's kind of the energy that I see this upcoming week. I think amazing things can come through, but it's also a reminder of that cliche of Rome wasn't built in a day. And likewise, these amazing outcomes of this transit will not be built in a day. It will take time. But the other thing is we still have Venus in Taurus, and Venus is in domicile in Taurus. So I love being in a time like this where we have a couple of planets that are either exalted or in domicile, and it's gorgeous. Like, yes, we have that fallen Mars as well, but we have more planets exalted or in domicile than fallen or detriment in this time. So I love it. And yeah, there are silver linings to all of this. Like the sun is still happy, Venus is still happy. There are silver linings. And the sun in Taurus, Venus in Taurus will be ending pretty soon, sadly, but we should continue enjoying it while it is here. So one of the transits that's happening this week, it's actually happening tomorrow, is on April 3rd, we will have Mercury joining Venus in Taurus. Now, sadly, this does mean Mercury will be leaving its friends, Jupiter and Sun, but it's kind of a good thing because we actually have an evening star Mercury right now, meaning it's rising after the Sun. So having that evening star Mercury with the evening planet Venus, potentially more favorable. And I think this can be a time where it brings action and communication to the favor of the Venus Taurus time that we've been in. Like, maybe you felt the energy shift, maybe you haven't seen any outcomes from the positive time of Venus and Taurus that we've been in for a little bit now, but having Mercury there actually creates more movement because Mercury is a very active planet. I think this transit can be favorable for love, favorable for communication around love, for movement of money and banking, and it's a great time to treat yourself and buy yourself things. So those things are all favored this week, starting from April 3rd and moving onward. And I will be posting an exclusive Patreon post about what Mercury and Taurus with Venus could mean for each rising sign. So join us over on Patreon if you want that breakdown. Okay, today, as far as the teaching portion, we're going to be talking about the traditional meanings as well as the Ellie meanings of each sign. And we're going to be talking about traditional sources. And I think my main goal for today is to teach you not just like what the signs mean, but where they get their meaning so that you can always remember or decipher the meaning of each sign. Because I think especially modern astrology just teaches people, okay, Aries means bold, brash, Leo means overly confident, but where did they get those meanings? And the lack of teaching people where those specific meanings comes from, it is what causes so many people to either not understand the signs or use grotesque stereotypes that don't actually fit the signs. So I'm going to teach you the background of each sign, the traditional meanings with sources and a little Ellie twist. The first thing you need to know, if we're going to be here, if we're going to connect, if I'm going to teach you, is the signs do not get their meanings from the houses, and the houses do not get their meanings from the signs. The signs and the houses have their own separate meanings, and you will expand your astrology knowledge times 100 if you disconnect the two, but you learn to use the two together. So many of the meanings that you've assigned to either the signs or the houses are flip-flopped to hell. And I'm hoping I can help you correct some of that today. So no, Aries does not represent the ego, the self, nothing related to the first house, and so on and so forth. Taurus doesn't even necessarily represent money in the way that you think it does in a different way. Let's start to actually dive in here. This is the breakdown of where the signs traditionally got their meaning. So number one, they're traditional rulers. Not their new rulers, not involving Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto at all. We're cutting those out. I could make another video on how we use those, but it's not as the rulers. They can also get their meanings from their exaltation ruler, and they lose meanings from the planets that fall or are detriment in them, if that makes sense. But today we're going to talk about where they gain their meaning. They also get their meaning from the modality. So whether something is fixed, cardinal, or mutable. That's the modality. They get their meaning from the element. You'll know that pretty well. It's fire, air, water, earth, and what those mean. Fire is more around passion. Earth is more around grounding. Air is around communication. Water is around feeling. How they display those will be different. And then they are quote-unquote gender or diurnal and nocturnal. And the gendered is just feminine, which I will use the word internal, and it means it's more internalized or more slow, and masculine is more external or speedy. It doesn't necessarily relate to gender, and I don't use it that way in my practice. Now, here's the addition that I add. I think that the season that they represent adds meaning as well. And this does have astrological backing, although it wasn't like written out in the way that I use it per se. And so this is the Ellie twist of it all, because it adds a lot of depth to my understanding. And it relates to the modalities as well, like to the cardinal, mutable, etc., because that's where they get their meanings. Like Aries starts spring, Taurus is fixed in spring, Gemini ends spring and helps prepare for the beginning of summer. And so for me, I see spring as growth and fertility. I see summer as heat and passion and art. I see autumn as receiving and reaping, and I see winter as slow, cold, and change. And adding that little depth of like the season that they were born in really helps me understand where many of the signs get their meaning. And now we are going to break down each planet. Now, it should be noted there are other ways that they traditionally got their meanings. I'm just focusing on these main ones. Traditionally, these signs were also said to get their meanings from like how the glyphs looked, whether they were human or animal, whether they were amphibious or land creatures, whether they had mouths or not. I'm not going to be getting into all of that. I'm keeping it both simple and deep so that you can gain an understanding. So my sources for the descriptions will be Valens. I'll be adding my 5 favorite Valens descriptors per sign, and I'll also be telling you where each sign gets its meaning. If you want to know more about what Valens had to say, you can definitely get his book. It's a translation of his work, the Valens Anthology. You can also look into the work of Demetra George or Chris Brennan. Both are amazing, and they've talked a lot about the meanings of the different signs and such. Let's dive into each sign, starting with Aries. So Aries is cardinal, so it's a starter. It starts off spring. And so when we recognize that Aries relates to spring, I think we can see why some people relate Aries to like sensual energy and to being kind of sexy and confident, because like I said, spring is fertility. It is external, so it is outward, it's radiant, it is fire, it's exalted in the sun and ruled by Mars, so it gets some of its meaning from Sun and Mars. And the 5 words I wrote down for Aries are governing, fiery, free, as well as public and restless. And I think those are 5 great words to describe the energy of Aries. But I should have also noted the intelligence of an Aries, because I think that is something that is ripped away from Aries very often. Aries gets its intelligence from the sun exalting there. And I don't think it's a side of Aries that should be forgotten. Aries would not be a good leader if not for its intelligence. So when we get to Taurus, Taurus is a fixed sign, so it's grounded, stubborn, in the middle of spring. And that, of course, makes sense with Taurus being very fertile and Venus energy. And it gets its meaning from both Venus and the moon. And believe it or not, Taurus gets its money making from the moon exalting in Taurus, because the moon, one of its traditional meanings was the gain of money, the making of money. And so many people are like, oh, Taurus is money because second house. Not the case at all. Taurus is money because the moon exalts there. And possibly Venus can represent, things that we buy with money, treating ourselves. So there could be that as well. Taurus is internal or feminine, so it receives, and it is, of course, earthy, and it may get some of its money meaning from earth as well. And the 5 words that I wrote down to describe Taurus are productive, so not the lazy sign that many modern astrologies made it out to be, rustic, nature, noble, energetic, and pleasure-loving. The pleasure-loving comes from Venus. The productivity comes from the earth, and as well as the nature and the more rustic side comes from earth as well. Gemini is a mutable air sign. It gets its meaning from Mercury, which rules Gemini. It is ending spring, helping prepare for summer, and it is an external or masculine / radiant sign. And my favorite descriptors of Gemini are scholars, judges of good and bad, seekers of mysticism, poets, and music lovers. And I think the judges of good and bad descriptor for a Gemini is really interesting because I think that's where like a lot of the modern understanding of Gemini comes from. Traditionally, Geminis are described as judges of good and bad. And when we think of modern descriptors of Geminis, people seem to see them as a little snobbish and judgy. And that's because they have great taste, first of all. And the thing about a Gemini is they'll often judge internally despite being external. Like, they will definitely communicate if they have a genuine issue, but they're kind of deciphering. They're figuring things out, and they can see both sides of something. So sometimes that judgmental side is hidden. And like I said, it's judges of good and bad. So they also are able to tell people like, hey, this thing is great, you should check it out. It's not always a negative thing, but I do think it's very fitting for Gemini energy. Cancers are cardinal. They are starting off the summer. And so, yes, Cancers have like this gorgeous sensual energy, the heat and the passion of the summer. They are emotional, but they're more than that. And they may even be carrying over some of the spring, more watery energy as well, because they are beginning the summer. They are internal or feminine. They are ruled by the moon, and they get some of their meaning from the exaltation of Jupiter, and they are a water sign represented by the crab. So these are the descriptions of Cancer. So many modern astrologers are misunderstanding Cancers. Cancers are described as popular, civic, theatrical, constantly changing, easily downcast, and party going. So Cancers, like, yes, they can get moody, yes, they can get sad, but they are often going to smile through it, drink through it, be the craziest, most like party-loving friend that you have. And it's because of that Jupiter exaltation. And even because the moon is represented as having like almost fake light. The moon is fake light. And so Cancer can be really theatrical. They can put on a show. They can be funny. And they are constantly changing. So they're having these ups and downs, but whether they show you the ups and downs depends on how well they actually know you, how well they actually trust you, how much they're actually going to let you into their world. And so many people see the outside of Cancer. They'll see popular, happy, thriving, and they'll assume, oh my God, that must be an Aries, that must be a Leo. Many Cancer suns will have Leo placements as well, but that's something else. That's another day. But they don't know that behind that shell, Cancers do have a depth. And it's not the traditional moody crybaby type of emotionality or changeability. Cancers can change from, they can have extreme high happies. That's a type of emotionality. They can start new things, make amazing art and projects based off of their sad times. They're the energy of the mother and the creator and the life giver. So yes, they are easily downcast, but just like some mothers, they sometimes need to quiet their own internal struggles in order to put on a happy face and do what they need to do and create what they need to create. And so many Cancers are actually very calm because they're able to put on that theatrical face. And I could talk about Cancers for hours. Leos are fixed in the summer, so the summariest of the summer. They are external or masculine. They are fire, and they get their meaning from the sun. No planet exalts in Leo, so it gets its meaning from the sun. Pure, fixed fire energy. They are described as noble, steady, just, independent, haters of evil, and of having lofty thoughts. So people, modern astrology, I should say, tends to think that Leo is this overly confident jackass, really. And that's simply not always the case. In fact, they are steady, they are loyal. Many Leos are anxious because Leos are cats, and some cats are more aloof. Some cats are more anxious. Some cats are super confident. And there's no wrong way to be a Leo. You Leos out there need to hear that. There is no wrong way to be a Leo. So if you aren't the super like vibrant, happy all the time, confident all the time Leo, you're still a valid Leo. Don't invalidate yourself. And Leos are the kings, right? So Leos are amazing leaders. They make great faces of the business. They do incredibly well, especially because Leo suns are just a very positive placement, and they'll often have that theatrical Cancer side as well. So they can do really well in show business. And I love them. I love Leos. I'm actually a Leo rising, so that's actually just me loving myself. But many Leos are not confident. Many Leos are feigning confidence, and each Leo has other sides. Yes, Leos are fixed, but remember, they have a whole goddamn chart. So each Leo, even if they're a fucking quadruple sun, has others. A quadruple Leo, I should say, has other sides. And not to mention the Leos who do have like many, many other placements. So Virgo energy. Virgos are mutable. They are ending spring, helping begin autumn. They are internal or feminine earth signs, and they get their meaning from Mercury. Mercury is both in domicile and exalts. The way that Virgos were described traditionally are mystic, luxurious, concerned with the body, changeable, and incomplete. And I believe the incomplete nature is just because of the way that many Virgos can search for completion outside of oneself, and that perfectionist nature of the Virgo causing them to search for more of themselves, for more of someone else, for something to fill them up and complete them. But of course, Virgos, you are complete, but sometimes you can feel incomplete and you can judge yourself in such a way. And the mystic side, Virgos are fucking magical. Virgos are witches. Virgos are herbalists. And I never see people giving Virgos enough credit. They'll talk about Scorpios like they're magical. They'll talk about everyone else. They'll talk about Pisces. They forget that Virgos were described as initiates into the occult. And so that may not be you. If you're a Virgo, you may not be into mysticism, but we need to give credit where credit is due. And Mercury is said to produce, like tarot readers, divination hoes, like astrology hoes. So, of course, Virgo can represent all of those things. Also, the Virgo representation of luxury, we're always giving that to the Venus signs. We're never recognizing that because Mercury is the internal facet of, Virgo is the internal facet of Mercury, that it also represents luxury. And it's sometimes quiet or practical luxury, but it's still luxury. And one of my best friends is actually a Virgo and just always has the nicest things and can recommend the best things, is always treating herself, and that's Virgo energy, whether you know it or not, it is. Libra. So Libra is cardinal. Libra is starting off the autumn. Libra is external. It is air. It is Venus, and it is Saturn. And I think the Saturn connection is why it's such a great way to start off autumn, because like I said, autumn is about reaping. It's about gaining. And Saturn is the fucking reaper. Saturn is you reaping what you sow, whether good or bad. And the scales of Libra means that it can be good or bad. It means that those scales of justice are going to balance out. So it is the starter of autumn. It is external, masculine, but that Venus side does give it like almost a feminine beauty as well. And this is how ancient astrologers described it. Vocal, covets the good of others, noble and just, but sometimes malicious. And it's that Saturn side that makes it malicious. Losing original possessions and then regaining, and representing the ups and downs of fortune, just like a scale. And I think my favorite descriptor is noble and just, but sometimes malicious. And it's because Libra is where Venus and Saturn meet. Libra is when Venus and Saturn come together and create magic, but a Libra will fight to create balance because of Saturn there. And it may do it in a way that you don't see as combative, but they will still fight for what is right for them, what is right for the people who they adore. So, never underestimate a Libra. Now we get to Scorpio, another greatly misunderstood sign because Scorpio is not ruled by Pluto. It is not death. It does not connect to the 8th house. Scorpio is its own thing. Scorpios are fixed in autumn. They are internal or feminine. They are water, so they are emotions, but they are ruled by Mars, and they get much of their meaning from Mars. So Scorpios were described as unchangeable, the destroyer, cunning, and conniving. Many of the Scorpio descriptions were actually not so nice. So here are my additions. I see Scorpio as depth, hidden emotion, and loyal to those who matter. Scorpios are very loyal. They are grounded, they're fixed, and so they're going to be loyal to the people they have an emotional connection to. Scorpio is the internal representation of Mars, right? So it takes hard emotions and it turns it into something beautiful. And that's actually where Scorpio gets the Phoenix energy. Not related to Pluto at all, but because it will take emotions through the fire and turn it into steam, turn it into a whole new element. And one way that I describe Scorpio is just seemingly calm. You will not know what a Scorpio is feeling until they are ready to let you into their world, and they do not let many into their world. So they are very deep, and they are the cliche of being mysterious, not because they try to be mysterious, but because they're not going to pull someone who's going to drown into their waters. And that's why they're selective. It's not even because they're better than you. It's not because they're mysterious. It's because they have such a deep understanding of emotions that they know not everyone can swim in their waters. And I do think there is a very kind side to them, in that they keep so much hidden, not for themselves. I'm sure it would feel great to get off of their chest, but often for others, because they can tell by perhaps experiences that when they share their deeper emotions, it doesn't go well. And so they hide. That's Scorpio energy. Sagittarius are mutable, external. They are fire. They get their meaning from Jupiter. And they are autumn, ending off of autumn, preparing for winter. They are described as governing, kingly, great-hearted, generous, and superior. So Sagittariuses are not even related to travel. They are related to like learning and teaching and growing, but they're not connected to the 9th house. So the Sagittarius meaning of, oh my god, this person's always traveling, they're always moving, it doesn't even really fit, really. If it did fit, it could just be because of the Jupiter expansion causing them to want to learn new things and connect to new places. But Sagittarius is about reaping, right? It's about gaining, but it's the gains of good. And because of that, Sagittarius is generous. It's like, I have more than enough. I'm a very generous hearted person. I'm going to be able to share with the people around me. They don't worry about sharing. I should have had this image so long ago. They don't worry about sharing. They don't worry about not having, because they are a benefic, lucky sign who's always going to have. Pisces can be a bit of a martyr. That's the other side of Jupiter, but Sagittarius is like, I'm sharing because I have more than enough. The downside of the Sagittarius energy is the superior description, because they're not necessarily superior, but some can view themselves as superior. So they can be a little snobby. They can be a little up on their high horse, a little holier than thou. They can think that they know best. And even though they're mutable, they have a stubborn nature every now and then when they're like, no, I do know best. Listen to me. And they may not always know best, right? No one's right 100% of the time. Capricorns are cardinal, so they're starting off winter. They are internal, so they're feminine. I think this is one feminine or internal sign that is often confused for a masculine one. They are earthly. They are getting their meaning from Saturn and the Mars exaltation. And Capricorns do not get enough credit for many things. I adore Capricorns. Capricorns are necessary. Capricorns are important. And they were described as, I'm going to start off with a couple kind of mean ones. Bear with me. I promise there are positive significations as well. But they're described as fickle, a maker of mistakes, stressed, burdened with care, and fond of jokes. And many Capricorns are incredibly mature. I believe that's because of being burdened with care. And that's where the stress comes from too. Capricorns care so much, but it doesn't always feel good. Capricorns are leaders, but they are the earthly leaders. They are the fixed leaders. They are the grounded leaders, compared to all the others. So they are initiators, but they're going to take their time. They're going to plan. They are described as like planners of great things. And so they may be the last leader to kind of come in, get all the details right, before the Virgo actually comes in and gets to nitpicking. They have this wonderful ability to see the big picture and work for the big picture. So while an Aries will start something and fuck off, a Capricorn will start something and stay and put their all into it and work their booty off. And my favorite side of Capricorns, they are funny. I would actually rule them as the funniest sign. I think they're funnier than Sagittarius's. I think they're funnier than Leo's. I think they have, and part of their great humor is their ability to laugh at themselves instead of others. They would rather make a self-deprecating joke than bring someone else down because they are burdened with care. So even their like stress and caring nature is actually a good thing because it's what makes them so caring. And it makes them a good planner. Now, because they are a cardinal, that's why Capricorns can be fickle. While they are the cardinal sign that's more willing to finish, they're still going to fuck off at some point. And they might underestimate themselves and not think that an idea they have is a good one. So there are complications to each sign, right? Aquarius is fixed, external, air sign, gets its meaning from Saturn, and a winter sign. It is described as artisan, malicious, carrying burdens, similar to Capricorn, petty, and generous. And that generous meaning is actually where Aquarius gets its meaning of kind of connecting to people and caring about the greater good. Out of the air signs, Aquarius is said to be the most intelligent because it is ruled by Saturn. It's bigger, it's given more time for its thoughts to become more lofty. Aquariuses really care about the big picture. And I think that's actually something Aquarius and Sagittarius have in common. So they don't get their meaning of like caring a lot about groups and the collective from the 11th house. They get it from the fact that they are generous and they have more time to think about things and understand things. They are very stubborn though, and they're stuck in their own ways. And that's where they get the quirky meaning, not Uranus, because they're going to realize what they like and they're going to do the fuck out of it and no one is going to stop them. And Pisces are mutable, internal, they are water, they get their meaning from Jupiter and the Venus exaltation, and they are the end of winter preparing for spring. And I think that spring preparation is actually super important for Pisces, and it's a little bit of that Venus energy as well, and that's where kind of the softness and that just kind of dreamy, lovey nature comes from, because they're preparing for a new cycle. They're preparing for the zodiacal new year. They're preparing for Aries to come in and take action and make its dreams coming true. And Pisces were described as sexy and erotic, and that's because of that Venus exaltation. They were described as being in conflict with themselves, like they're the fish. Sometimes those fish are swimming in different directions and getting lost. They're described as sociable, wandering, and popular. And all of that is because Jupiter and Venus, like Pisces gets its meaning from the two benefics. And that's why I think Pisces is such a beautiful benefic sign that I would never want to give over to cruel Neptune, really. And yeah, Pisces is sexy. It is sensual. I don't think it gets enough credit for being so. People forget that Venus likes to be there for a reason. And any of the signs other than Taurus that are ruled by benefics have ups and downs of luck in their nature. And the reason Taurus doesn't have it is because it's fixed. Lucky Taurus. But Sagittarius, Pisces, and who the fuck am I missing? Sagittarius, Pisces, and Libra all represent gaining and losing of luck. And that just goes to show that 3/4 of the time, most of the time, luck comes to us not in one big pile, but in movement and in change and in the ups and downs. And that's because those signs are either cardinal or mutable, which represents changeability or starting something new. But that's Pisces. They are gorgeous, lucky, lovable, and they get their dreamy nature not from Neptune, but from Jupiter and Venus, and from getting ready for the dreams and newness of the spring season. That is how you can learn each of the signs. I do have personal astrology one-on-one teachings. If you want to dive into this a little bit more to me, check that out. Join me over on Patreon. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of my podcast, and it was great getting to know you. Bye.